Bo, your host of Good Work Chicago. We are the show that highlights employers who pay people fairly, and we talk with advocates who are trying to raise standards for all workers in the Chicagoland area. It's been an exciting week this week already with our city council looking at raising the minimum wage in Chicago, and we're all waiting to see what our state legislature will do as well. But this afternoon, we're delighted to have with us Brendan Martin to talk with us about a worker-owned co-op, which is a model that other countries use a lot, and we don't have that much in the country, and certainly not much here in Chicago. So, New Era Windows, tell me about the history of this co-op forming.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thanks for having me here. So, New Era Windows is the product of a very interesting and rich history. Back in 2008, right after the financial crisis, you might remember that the banks got bailed out in a large act by Congress and the president. There was a lot of anxiety about a crash and depression, and a lot of anxiety then about all the money that was taken and given to certain parts of the economy to save it. And in that environment where lots of people were suffering and there was anxiety about where we were putting our money as a country, you watched the factory in Chicago on Goose Island get closed. And when it was closed suddenly. There were a number of ways in which it was closed that were deemed to be illegal. The workers were thrown out on the street in one day, and their contracts were not adhered to. Their contracts for severance pay and everything else. In the light of that, a lot of the workers decided they should stand up and protest for just their contracts to be fulfilled. And that was a time when the United States public was very sympathetic to that, after having spent many billions, close to $1 trillion bailing out banks. When this company said they couldn't pay people their contracts required them because the bank decided not to extend them the credit, a lot of people in the U.S. said, "Hey, there's something wrong here." So this protest, the struggle, got an incredible amount of attention. In the time in 2008, this is when Barack Obama was first running for president. It required him to talk about what was happening. It required John McCain to talk about what was happening, and everybody in the country was really gripped by this. Now, the workers ended up getting what they were due just by their contracts, but the process sort of opened up the possibility for, well, what is really due for workers in a larger picture? Okay, we got what we deserve in this battle, but how do we actually change things in the long run? The problems in the long run for the workers in this country weren't getting better, and so that space that opened up didn't close again. The workers really took it into themselves that they were protagonists. They were sort of agents in their own change and their own possibility, and they spent the next couple of years being bought and sold by a couple different owners until finally they came to us, the working world, a couple of years ago. We worked in Argentina with factories that were taken over by the workers, and they said, "Hey, we want to buy out our company too because we think we could run it and might be able to work better." And that was 2 years ago now. And now in Chicago, you have the New Era Windows Cooperative. It began producing. Its prototype season started last year, just a year ago, and now in its first full year of production, it's already hitting solvency, which is pretty incredible for a new business that young. And the sky's the limit.
Let me just jump in here. I have a little personal connection with this in that when the workers first occupied the plant, I got this call from Arise Chicago, would you come join sort of this protest outside? And my board of directors for Interfaith Worker Justice was meeting in Chicago at that time. And so we took the entire board of directors down outside the plant one cold winter afternoon. So anyway, so I have a little personal connection with this as well. So tell me, I really don't know much about co-ops, and I assume a lot of our listeners don't either. So how does this work? Like, companies are owned by the workers? I mean, how does that happen?
Well, how it happens is as varied as any business coming into existence happens. It can happen by a group of workers deciding to start up a new company that they will own together. It can happen by taking an existing business and converting it, which is kind of what New Era was. That business really got closed down, and it was sort of out of the ashes of it. A new company was started. Sometimes it's a much smoother transition. You can have owners decide to sell to the workers, and the business never has to stop and collapse the way that one did. And you can have smaller cooperatives expand to create more cooperative jobs and decide to continue that path. So really, conversion in startup is the most common you'll see. And the harder question is, well, okay, why does it happen? When? What are the circumstances? How do you get a bunch of workers to become owners? And there's a lot of answers to that. There are sort of economic structural answers, and then there's just even the knowledge, the education. Think about what happened in New Era. Workers who had worked in this company, some of them for 20 years, never thought of owning one. And it wasn't until they were faced with this crisis, and they saw, and the workers saw, and the people of the country saw that they didn't have to just accept what was handed to them. The world, it wasn't necessarily just what was in front of us, but we could remake it, just like any business owner gets to. And it was really that sort of light bulb going off that was the crucial thing to really make this work cooperative happen. So much of it is even the workers believing, society believing, all of us putting ourselves behind this as not just an odd solution, but actually as one of maybe the most promising solutions we have to the labor problems and the income disparity that we face today in the United States of America.
And so, how many workers are there now at New Era?
Right now, there are 16 worker owners. We started small. The idea was not to do this kind of like blow up really big and watch the debt and have to collapse again, but be lean, follow the lean startup model. If sales continue to grow the way they have been, we project that it could hire at least 50 to 70 workers. That gets to be about the size that most Windows factories in the country that do the kind of window manufacturing that New Era does, the most are. It's very plausible we could be on the larger end and hit up to 120 to 150 workers.
Wow. And so the 16, but there were a lot more workers than that originally. So how did you decide who were the 16 that got to be worker owners?
Right. Well, so there were a lot more workers at some point in the history of this factory, but the size of the Republic Windows and Doors factory in some ways was caused by the huge housing boom that occurred. It was one of the largest window manufacturers of that size in the country. After the kind of shakeup of the building supplies industry after that housing boom, there are not many window factories of that size. So also, the workers have to look at the economic realities of what is the real option here. We have to actually be at the right size that's going to be efficient and actually answer the needs of the market. So, the realities come first. Even the workers might have where they want to go, but then they think, okay, what is possible, and then you have to marry the two. So, what looks possible in this environment was a factory from somewhere between 50 to 100 workers, and that's the size of the factory that the workers have gone for. So, in terms of how do you decide, I mean, really what we said was we'll open up the gates, go to all the workers, and say who wants to try this, and believe it or not, not that many workers would believe it. It's hard to decide you want to suddenly become an owner. Like I said, that light bulb moment is very rare in the United States. So these early conversions like this, it's not that hard. Usually it's only a few really stalwart, courageous folks who come out and want to do this. Now there's a lot of old workers who suddenly come knocking on the door and say, hey, I heard of this happening, and this has gone well. And as you see it start to go well, a lot of workers will realize it was possible. And that's a good thing because that's how you make the next cooperative and the next cooperative. I saw this in Argentina. A lot of people didn't believe their husbands or wives or coworkers could actually take over and run their business. And it turned out they could. In fact, most of them survived and paid better than they used to be paid and had a number of other advantages. And after it was proven, a lot of workers saw that and thought, wow, we should do this too. And you saw the number of worker takeovers in factories just grow exponentially in Argentina. So if this were the third or fourth or fifth factory in Chicago that this were happening to, it's possible it would be a lot harder to figure out if you had to shrink down the company what you would do. Right now, it wasn't that hard.
Huh. So you have these 16 people who say, okay, I'll do that. And then, does everybody sit around in a room and everybody votes for, here's what we're going to do? Or how do people manage themselves? How do you set up a management structure? What do you do?
Sure. To make a worker cooperative, there's a lot of education that has to happen. People have to learn about how a business is run. They have to learn how to manage themselves. They have to realize, oh, this is now mine. I can participate in this. And that's often a big shift for people, that mental shift of thinking, to taking ownership. that's the real key. That's the magic that makes a worker cooperative work. There's all sorts of management practices and everything else you can put up there, but if the workers don't have a sense of this is ours, it's not going to work. That's really the magic. If they do have that sense, then whatever problem comes their way, maybe they won't figure it out today, or they'll figure it out tomorrow. And eventually, I've seen this over and over in hundreds of factories across the world. The workers really believe it's theirs. They will figure out how to solve the problems they face, and they'll figure out how to make their business a success. So I've definitely, that, but it still takes a long time to get there. I think, though, for as much as workers need to figure out how we're going to manage ourselves, it seems like such a difficult question. But if you step back and recognize this isn't as strange a question as we would think. Cooperatives aren't the opposite of what we do. They're not such a strange beast. We can't imagine how they would work. Think of it as a partnership. Lots of partnerships have a number of people to get together and have to make decisions. A cooperative is just like a partnership. Very few businesses in the United States actually have one person makes all the decisions. They almost always have a committee of some kind. It's what happens in most businesses. Eventually, there's a line drawn that says we're the ones who get to make the decisions, and then there's a line, and everyone on that side doesn't. In a cooperative, that line doesn't happen. Everyone's in. Now, in any company when there's a lot of people making decisions, you don't make decisions about everything. You don't say, okay, I have to decide if we need to restock the water cooler. Everyone come on in for a meeting. You don't do that. You delegate, you make structures, you make efficient methods of dealing with problems so that you can respond to things quickly, you can respond to things efficiently. Worker cooperatives happen exactly the same. Sometimes it gets big enough, certain things you only vote on once a year. And you vote in, you did a great job of running this part of the company. We're going to vote you in. We're going to watch how well you did, just like our democracy works politically. So the answers, oddly enough, are not as surprising and difficult for us to sum it up as we might think. And once practiced for a while, so worker pay, all of a sudden workers will have something to say about that. They get involved in voting for what do we get paid, how do we pay ourselves. They have to still respond to market realities. They would say, well, we need to bring in some more members. We don't pay well enough. No one's going to want to come here. They have to still pay a good enough wage. But it's the workers who actually get to look at, well, what are our options? What does this company have? If you take an identical company, one that's worker-owned and one that's not, and everything are identical about them, and it had some profit, that company, then you know the workers in the worker cooperative will be paid better because they get the profit.
They get to share in that profit.
Share in that profit. So you can assume that there will be more upside available to the workers. But there's more to just that. That's a comparison of what is a normal business and then a co-op business. If they were identical, oh, there's a bit more money to go in this one. That's a magic change that makes. When you've got those workers who say, oh, there's a profit, we get it, all of a sudden their relationship to their own business changes dramatically.
Much more interested in the business.
That idea that there's this tension between a boss and a worker. A boss wants to get the worker to work as hard as possible for as little money as possible. Maybe a worker wants the opposite, get paid as much as possible, work as less as possible. That intrinsic tension and contradiction within the typical setup goes away. That's what I talked about earlier, that transition understanding you have ownership, this is mine. And to come to work and realize that I actually own this, and if we have more profits this year, I make more money this year, that's the key magic. But it's not magic only because you realize I'll make a little bit more money, but because you realize that you feel the fruits of your own labor and your own work, that your work is something when you go to every day that you care about and it cares about you. If you do a good job with your work, it'll take care of you better at the end of the year, at the end of the day. And I see this all the time in the America. I see workers who, they want to come in on a Saturday. The head of the union, a lot of the workers were heads of the union before who would have had also pull out all sorts of rule books about how they're not supposed to come in on Saturdays as a way to try to protect themselves before. We'll say, well, now the way to protect myself is to all come together and come in on Saturday if there's an opportunity to do something. And they do that happily. It's not it's part of their community. It's what they do. It's like going out to tend your own garden. It's something that's joyful, and I just saw that last Saturday. I'll probably stay up this Saturday again today. This week.
So tell me a little bit about how many worker-owned co-ops are there in the country, and what are how many of them are cleaning co-ops, kind of real small things? How many of them are in manufacturing? I really would be interested in kind of what's the broad scale co-ops in the U.S.?
Right. Well, cooperatives in the United States, you can read a lot about them on the U.S. Federation of Worker Cooperatives website, USFWC.
Okay.
And you can learn all about them. There's probably a cooperative in your community wherever you are. It's mostly Chicago. There's definitely a cooperative in your community. Come on down to 2600 West 35th Street, where New Era is. But they do run the gamut, the cooperatives in this country. There are, there are some that make, import and roast and sell coffee. There are cleaning cooperatives. There are manufacturing cooperatives. There are taxi cooperatives. There's cooperatives across the board. It's still small, but it is a very growing phenomenon in the U.S. There are parts of the world where there are far more worker cooperatives. And so in the United States, those of us who are interested in cooperatives have often looked to these other parts of the world where there's very mature cooperative economies. In the northern part of Spain, there's a cooperative community called Mondragon, M-O-N, like Mondragon. You can look it up on the internet. Some of the largest companies in all of Spain are these worker-owned companies. Some of the most successful, most profitable companies in all of Spain and in many parts of Europe are worker-owned from this area in Mondragon. Mondragon was a tiny little poor village back in the 50s, and they decided to take their economic fate into their own hands. They made their own bank, and they started making their own worker-owned companies. And now, 50, 60 years later, there's almost no phenomena like it. Their meteoric rise to being this industrial giant out of this tiny village setting is incredibly powerful as an experience to study and to learn from. And what many people in the United States are trying to do now is take the lessons from that and see how we can apply them here in the United States. One of the most obvious points to make from that is having worker cooperatives and all the great benefits that they bring doesn't happen on its own. It takes society to want to do this. It's not only a question of workers wanting to own. They have to have the chance to have access to the money, the training, and all the skills that right now might only be available to typical owners. But if you take a community like this village and you say, well, it's a benefit to us if we keep a local business, it's going to hire ourselves, and going to keep the profits locally. Why not put our own money into this local bank rather than a bank that's going to take its money and invest it overseas or who knows where? We'll take care of ourselves and we'll grow ourselves this way. And there's a real possibility to do that in the United States. There's a possibility to take care of our worker cooperatives like New Era and buy your windows from them. There's also a possibility for the profits from New Era to be put into a community bank that would invest in more cooperatives here.
And are there banks in Chicago that are open and interested in this?
It's a new idea. There's very few banks that really do this now. What we really look to more are community loan funds. That's sort of what the working world is, although we're a model for that. We're a community loan fund that's based in Argentina and Nicaragua. And now in the United States, we were based in New York City, but we knew people at New Era. They asked us to come to Chicago, so we came to Chicago.
Nice.
But the idea of growing that part of our economy that when you put your money in your bank, it does more than just gives you interest or not.
Right.
It has all that money is then invested somewhere,
right.
And that shapes our economy. That ends up shaping the jobs that you have, the jobs that your children have, and to sort of take control of our economy again. To think, where is our money invested? What are we investing in? Are we investing in ourselves and our future growth? That idea can be brought to the local loan funds, to credit unions, to banks that might invest locally, and might follow these ideas to create not just something that will maximize profit for a couple of shareholders in New York or in Tokyo, but to people who live and work and own in Chicago, to have those be the beneficiaries, have the local community. So you don't watch all the profit get siphoned off somewhere else, but you actually see it reinvested in your own community.
The contrast this last Friday was Black Friday, right, where people were protesting Walmart.
Right.
And my sons and I were at 2 Walmarts on Friday. And this is a company where workers make just a little bit above minimum wage, sort of in the $9, $10 an hour range. And 6 people have the same wealth, the Walton families, as 42% of the American public.
It's unbelievable.
It's unbelievable concentration. And so it seems like we certainly need more of these co-ops. So the question is, what can normal people like me, what could I do? I can look at New Era windows when I'm getting windows, but if there's not a lot of them in Chicago, what can I do to encourage them, support them? What are 3 or 4 things? Are there Are there groups of workers? Let's say there's a group of workers who'd like to form one. What should they do? What about an owner who, is ready to retire and might be interested in exploring this in terms of ownership style? What could he or she do?
Right.
I mean, what are some
Right.
things that we
That's a
here
very
in
good
Chicago
question.
could do?
That's a great question. And to answer that, I want to point out here some facts we've kind of been expressing. I want to say it really clearly. So what we're talking about here is better wages. We're talking about having workers be treated well and have more in their pockets. Right now in the United States of America, we have record corporate profits. There's never been more corporate profits. We don't have a bad economy. What you see is that where are those profits going? They're going to 8 people. They're not going to most of the public. And one way to challenge that is for owners to have a different sensibility and decide to pay their workers more. That's something I'm going to have to applaud generously. But another thing is to change the ownership structure. If you have workers owning, then it's not a question of just having a benevolent boss on top, and the workers themselves own that profit. I don't really see a way to unlock all that profit in there without changing the way we have our ownership structure.
Brendan, we do have one caller, and we've only got a couple minutes, so let's
I want to get a chance to talk about things we can do. Unlock that profit.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. Okay, I'll make it brief. I saw last night that the City Council approved a $13 minimum wage here in Chicago, and I wanted to know what that meant for people who are already making $13 or $14. Will they be subject to an increase comparable to what they were making before, or would they essentially be stuck at $13?
There's no law that would require employers to raise other people. But in fact, what often happens when there's an increase in the minimum wage is that employers on their own kind of push up all wages because they don't want sort of workers who've been around for a long time at the same rate as kind of new hires who come in at the lower rate. But just to be clear, also the $13 an hour doesn't go into effect until 2019. So the first increase would be next summer, and that would be to $10. So again, it's going to be a good time till it's 13. So, but thank you for your call. Now let's go back quickly to the earlier question because we've only got a couple minutes here.
All right. How do we actually do this? Well, how do we actually support cooperatives? How do we make this sort of dynamic transformation of value and wealth sharing in our country? If you're the public, believe it. Number one, it's possible, it's real. Support it. Find the cooperatives in your community. Buy your windows. Don't just buy your windows from anywhere. Buy your windows from a community and business. Okay. Buy your windows there. Buy your baked goods at cooperative bakeries. If you're a worker, believe it and do it. Think about what would it be like to try to start our business and convert our business to worker ownership, or to actually leave our business and start our own business with just the workers if it's not an option.
And if they need help, they could call your nonprofit for that help?
They can check the U.S. Federation of Worker Cooperatives.
Okay.
They can look to the Working World. There's a number of other nonprofits across the country. Right. You'll find them a lot through the U.S. Federation of Worker Cooperatives website. Right. If you're an owner, especially if you're an owner who's already interested in increasing wages, think about conversion. It doesn't just mean you're going to share your profits more. Every worker brings more to the table in their worker owner. It transforms your whole business. It changes the way you relate to your business too. So if you're an owner, consider the cooperative option.
That's great. Well, before we close, I do want to say if you work for an employer who does not pay you well, you can call our wage theft hotline, 773-391-8885. Get help from attorneys who can help you recover your unpaid wages. We really appreciate your time, Brendan. Loved learning about co-ops, and I think this might be a direction that we as a country need to go. So thank you so much.
I very much appreciate it. Thank you.